Okay, this is gonna be a pretty interesting one for me. Mainly because it's been a while since I played devil's advocate to this level. Like usually I kind of try and find my own angle, but this time I feel like I'm playing full devil's advocate, even though not 100%, just mostly devil's advocate. And judging by the title of this episode, some people might choose to cancel me, and maybe they might be like, oh my goodness, I finally knew. But all in all, I would like to urge that you just listen to the entire episode because I have a couple of points that I'd like to bring up which I feel might actually help my argument, or at the very least might actually make you question if you've been thinking about this entire topic, or should I say this entire person a little wrong. And while I get that some of you might never look at him in a positive light for the rest of your lives, or since ever, I would like to urge you to at least consider the thought that maybe there might be some good there. Although, before I can get into any of that, I probably should have started with an intro because I'm already explaining myself and, a bunch of times past. Also, manners, I guess. So, welcome to the Breakdown Podcast, where I talk about love, sex, and relationships from a guy's perspective, as well as a bunch of other guy shit. The man on the mic is Sir Denver B. This is a shorter, less edity, no instrumentally version of the podcast, which I usually release whenever I'm on break. And normally it's supposed to be like 3 weeks, but for some reason this one's been stretched out a little bit. I don't know. Maybe I'll explain once I get back to regular episodes, but for now these are the ones that are coming through. And they're fairly short episodes where I basically talk about one topic and I pretty much discuss some of the topics or some of the things that I didn't end up discussing in some of the long length episodes, or just some of the topics that I feel I should probably be discussing because they kind of occurred in my mind after a while, or as a matter of thought. And thoughts is what I want to leave some of y'all with, if not change your minds completely, because what I have today, or at least on this episode, is something that I feel some people might just wonder why I'm discussing it, or some others might feel like it's a tired out topic, or a couple other people might look at me and be like, how dare you, or why would you say such a thing? And it involves one of the world's most famous influencers, or world's most famous people, Andrew Tate, and the fact that I think that he might not have been as wrong as most people thought. Now, of course, it's one of those things that when I was thinking about, I figured I might get cancelled if I speak on it. If cancel culture still exists, I haven't heard of cancel culture in a minute. But, whether it does or it doesn't, at the end of the day, fuck it. I basically do this podcast to spew a bunch of my thoughts on different things. And, I have people that like it. So I'm just hoping they like this one as well. Now, I'm going to be very honest. This did not come out of the blues. This was actually influenced by a video that I saw on IG not too long ago, where a guy was busy talking about why Andrew Tate isn't as bad for boys as you think. Now, I am going to let the video clip play. It's a little bit long, almost 3 minutes, but then I can get into my thoughts on it because I feel like this guy laid something out pretty well that goes in line with what I believe is very important and very essential to masculinity. So let me not waste time, and so without further ado...
Toxic masculinity is a necessary evil for the proper development of men. This means that attacking it, while morally justifiable, poses deeper social developmental issues for boys. Stay with me now. I propose that masculinity is a set of character virtues: courage, willpower, leadership, physical capacity, independence, and confidence, perhaps among many others. Aristotle explained that all virtues lie at the golden mean between a vice of deficiency and a vice of excess. For example, take courage. Too little courage and you're a coward, too much and you're rash. Or willpower, too little and you're indulgent, too much and you're self-deprecating. This same schema works for every single virtue. Now here we find 3 archetypes of man: the boy, the man, and the villain. As boys, we find ourselves with vices of deficiency along every axis. We are physically and emotionally helpless, scared, indulgent to our desires, submissive to and dependent upon our parents within a world that we have no experience within. As we grow into adolescence, we're told to grow up, to stop being wimpy, soft, and gay, to be a man. So how does one go from a boy to a man, from a vice of deficiency to a virtue? Aristotle said you have to overshoot the mean by replicating those who act according to the traits that you wish to embody. For example, if you're a coward, you must strive to be rash in order to eventually self-correct and embody the virtue of courage. Why? Because you can't possess a virtue unless you have a capacity for the two vices that frame it. A man cannot be courageous without the capacity to be rash, to make hard, potentially dangerous decisions on an instinct. He cannot be physically competent to protect and provide for his loved ones without the capacity for violence. He can't be independent without the capacity to detach from others and his feelings about them. The same schema applies to every virtue. You must have the capacity of the villain in order to have the virtue of the man. As boys, we intuitively understood this. It's why damn near every dude once idolized rash, domineering, violent, detached, narcissistic men. It's why boys look up to villains, real and fictional. Not because the villain is good. The villain doesn't represent virtue any more than the boy. But the villain represents a capacity that boys must possess before they can be virtuous, before they can be men. Therefore, as a society, if we want virtuous, strong, capable, courageous men, we must first grant boys the capacity, the freedom to admire and replicate villains. Not because the villain is good, but because he is necessary for the good in man.
Okay, particularly interesting take, and in a lot of what the guy was saying, I feel like he created a pretty good foundational basis for me to work off of, because it was after listening to this video that I was like, you know what, I feel like people hate on Andrew Tate a little too much, and he's not all that bad. Now, don't get me wrong, it's not like he outright said that Andrew Tate is like a bad person or the villain here. It's just that in a lot of the visualization and a lot of the things that he was saying, he was basically trying to hit at Andrew Tate. And on the video, he did have, you know, right under the whole villain moniker, a drawing of Andrew Tate of some sort. So, you know, that is kind of the case. But with that said, I like how he spoke on how toxic masculinity is or can be a necessary evil. Now, I'm not going to lie to you. It's not like I disagree with the guy. It's just that I don't really believe in the idea of toxic masculinity. Just mainly because I think that what is toxic is people, not necessarily the idea or the ideals, whichever ones you believe in, of masculinity. And one of the main reasons why I believe this is because a lot of what you may consider toxic masculinity is not necessarily just created by the man or by men, but this is something that is also nurtured and created by women. How many times have you heard women basically telling a man to be a man? Oh, you know, men don't do this, men don't do that as a man. Why are you crying? Like, you hear stuff like this, which basically pushes a guy to move beyond how he feels and how he should act based off of how he's been raised as a person into this sort of kind of idea or ideal that some woman will say that men are or aren't supposed to do such a thing or be such a thing, and suddenly now they start embodying something that may be considered toxic. So essentially, are you saying that, you know, the woman is an embodiment of toxic masculinity, but she's a woman? So anyways, like, my point is, I don't think that masculinity is in any way toxic. I think it's the people that can be toxic. And for the most part, masculinity just catches strays out here. But anyways, with all of that said, the idea of the villain and or toxic masculinity that was basically put out was based on Andrew Tate, which is particularly interesting. One, you know, you could say that it is fairly trendy considering that the guy did have a fight. So his name is probably going around the internet as of the time of this recording. But even besides that, it's also the fact that Andrew Tate was basically at some point the most popular person on the internet. Like, there was barely anyone who didn't know who Andrew Tate was. You could go to people's villages and those guys would know who Andrew Tate is, both men and women. But all of that said and done, he has been looked at as this embodiment of toxic masculinity, which I kind of look at, and I honestly don't think people give him enough credit as far as, you know, trying to help men to some degree, and I will get to why in a moment. But essentially, like, he's been looked at as the moniker of what toxic masculinity is. He's considered a bad example for young boys and young men. And so, like, the way people kind of look at him tends to be very negative, but I like the fact that this guy was bringing out this idea that he is part of an extreme that is inherently negative because it is an extreme, But when you decide to actually put some control on it, you can actually develop something pretty good, which is what his idea or ideals of what masculinity is kind of come out pretty well. And while some people may agree or disagree, I also agree with what the guy is saying, because a lot of my ideas, or a very big part of my idea of what masculinity is very deeply rooted in control. I believe that control is a pretty paramount part of what makes up masculinity as is, or at least the idea or ideals of masculinity that we all love to talk about or speak about or believe in. And I believe in this because inherently, like, I guess, okay, maybe I might be sucking my own dick here, or I might just be tooting the horn for men, but I believe that men are very powerful creatures, and even as human beings, men are very, very powerful in a lot of what they do. Whether you're looking at it in terms of, problem solving, whether you look at it in terms of physical strength, men are actually quite powerful. Now, I'm not saying that women aren't. Women are very smart and they do have their own power in their own right, but a lot of what makes good men, if I can put it like that, is very deeply rooted in your ability to control the power, or the chaos, if you would call it that a lot of us men kind of have inbuilt within us. And I'll kind of give a pretty good example with a lot of, say, action movies or martial arts movies. When you look at the movies themselves, you realize that it's usually either one of two instances for the main character. It's either the main character either doesn't know and is probably very troubled, and then ends up learning some sort of martial art or some sort of training that makes them dangerous, or you find that it's someone that is very experienced and has the ability to cause great harm and, has some sort of dangerous level training, but chooses to restrain themselves and makes them look like a good main character, or makes them look like a good hero. And, even with the rom-coms, it isn't too far from that. You find that the guy either has a lot of success with women or has no success and then moves to having a lot of success with women. And then suddenly it's like, now this guy is super attractive. And you notice that for that to happen, it basically gets to the point where this man has learned to hone his chaos to a point where he can basically tune it and he can kind of focus it where it's needed, and particularly well. And therein lies the idea of masculinity as far as I've seen it. You can also see this in real life. When you look at a lot of the men that are considered desirable, it's usually the men that can attract a lot of female attention, or know how to attract a lot of female attention, but pretty much choose to select the one person that they want to be with. And you see this a lot with, for example, guys that have a girlfriend being hotter, or at least being considered hotter to a lot of other girls, or even married men. And you see that with pre-selection bias. You look at the guys that tend to be banging a lot of chicks, and you may choose to put all the blame on pre-selection bias, but also when you think about it on like an intrinsic level, you kind of realize that the guy that's able to get multiple women but can get one woman and put all of his focus on her, or can basically put most of his focus on her, will kind of appeal because he knows how to handle the female gaze, or at least he knows how to handle female attention. But if it's a guy that gets zero female attention, and then you choose to be with this guy, and then suddenly he has, this multitude or just increased female attention, he may not know how to be able to control that because he just doesn't have the experience. And as such, you can get why there's some guys that aren't considered attractive just because they do not seem to have a lot of female attention around them. Although, I should probably get back to what I was talking about. Sorry, I kind of digressed and went on like a tangent for a little bit. Now, when you look at the idea of Andrew Tate, he was hated, but when you kind of look at a lot of the stuff that he used to say online, it's not like he was all wrong. It's not like he was wrong about everything. And when you look at the bulk of people that hate or hated Andrew Tate, a lot of them disliked him because of the stories they heard about him. Whether it was the sex trafficking allegations, whether it was the idea that he might be scamming millions of people with the real world or with Tate University or some shit like that, whether it was the stuff that he would say that would end up being clipped and being put online, people generally hated Andrew Tate because they believed that he used to speak ill about women and just had very, very toxic views on life and masculinity and manhood. But if you actually did listen to him, then you'd realize that that's not entirely the case. There's a lot of what he would say that, would just seem very wild and very odd. But when you peel past the theatrics, when you actually go and even look at a lot of the interviews that he did, a lot of the podcasts he was on, back when he was like very, very big and famous, a lot of what he was talking about was more of self-improvement from a man's perspective, and the idea that masculinity is deeply rooted in putting in hard work and, like going through sacrifice and struggle, but eventually rising from that and becoming a more successful, much better individual that is very, very resourceful. And I remember the first encounter that I had with Andrew Tate was actually a clip that I ended up handling on the podcast, where one of the first things that he said is, women want a man who can fight. And I was like, I don't think that's particularly true. But when he went into actually explaining it, it actually made sense. Now, don't get me wrong, the idea that women want a guy that can fight isn't entirely something that I think every woman wants. Hell, I don't even think women want to see fights happening. At least a lot of the ones that I talk to don't. But the idea, or at least the skill of fighting, is particularly important for men. Now, it's not the most useful skill right now, but if you end up in a not so safe part of town and you're with your significant other and, you need to defend yourself or defend her and, things are physical, then it is pretty good to have that skill. It's kind of like having the skill of knowing how to change a tire as a guy. It's not like you're going to be changing tires every single day or even once a quarter or even for years, but the moment you have a flat tire, you're going to be expected, if your baby's in the car or if other people are in the car, you are going to be expected to be able to know how to handle that. So it's not like you need it every day, but it's a good tool to have in your arsenal, at least so that, you use it when the time comes. The idea of being resourceful and making money and being successful, much as it did come from a fairly toxic point of view where the guy was just talking about all of his cars and all the stuff he owns, he did motivate a lot of guys to actually put in the work and make money. I know someone fairly close to me that has been a big Andrew Tate supporter and basically one of his biggest fans, who even, I think, went through the real university, if I'm not wrong. But after doing all of that, and, even after all of the Tate stuff happened, this guy puts in a lot of work, basically tries to do the best every single day. He does a lot of gig work, but the guy seems to be making pretty good money. And if anything, you can't say that the kind of influence that Tate had on him was particularly bad. So if you put the theatrics back on, there's definitely some problems that you'll see in stuff that he says and or does. But for the most part, within those theatrics, and if you drill deeper and deeper into the kind of guy that Tate is, as far as him being seen on the internet is concerned, he's not so bad. All right. And to kind of conclude all of this, what I am trying to say is Andrew Tate isn't all good. Hell, neither are the villains when you kind of think about it. But if you really, really think, the best villains are usually the ones that have good motives but tend to be morally corrupt. So if in the admiration we can learn to strip away the morally corrupt and find the good nuggets within those people or within those characters, then in my opinion, I think we're golden. Although maybe I could be wrong about this, and maybe my idea of Andrew Tate might be a little bit warped, and maybe I'm a secret follower. Either way, I want your thoughts on it. The DMs are open. On IG, it is at the breaktime_podcast. On Facebook, it is at the breaktime podcast. On X, it is at Bagaka the D. And on Bluesky, it is at the breaktimepod.bsky.social. Thank you so much for listening all the way till the end of this episode, and I will catch you guys on the next break.